This is live training from Unity Technologies, and I am Adam Buckner, one of the live trainers here, giving our traditional Monday presentation, Monday night for me in the UK. So what are we doing tonight? Creating scroll lists at runtime. It's actually a relatively simple solution, but it's one that people have asked me to do many, many times. So I'm going to do it. And I'm going to show some little things that'll help us towards the end. We're not going to be doing anything fancy today. No lovely backgrounds, nothing cute, just Unity. When we look at trying to populate, say, a list of buttons that could be created from contents at runtime, say you have a number of things in a bag, or you have a stable full of dragons or whatever, and you need to see a list of them, and maybe you want that list to do something when you click on it, but that content changes depending upon the state of your game. So you can't set up that scroll list during edit time and just have it work. You need to be able to create that framework, that shell for the scroll list, and then populate it during runtime. Also, I think one of the biggest issues that people have with this is it's deceptively simple. With a few built-in elements, we can quickly make one. And so people have come up with convoluted solutions to this relatively simple problem and then found themselves in a world of trouble. Essentially, all we need is a panel with our scroll rect on it, with our image and mask script to contain it, and then a layout group and some content size fitters. That's essentially all we need to do to be able to make it. But we'll look at also how to write a quick loop to populate these buttons at runtime, and some little things that might make it a little bit easier to hook up a button to get it to work, including looking at some event systems. So anyway, let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is get our canvas going, and I want to create a panel in that canvas. So I can simply come up to Create. Go to Create UI, and let's create a UI panel. And then let's just frame select on that canvas and zoom in. Okay. And when we create the panel, it's automatically creating our canvas, and it's creating our event system. And that panel is going to fill the canvas. And so let's just sort of back it out a little bit. If I hold down the Shift key and then go ahead and drag the anchor, it should also move the rect itself. Let me go and move to our rect tool so we can see our proper handle. So let's just make a little space for a panel. Don't really care what size it is. It's kind of generic, so this is something that we could bring up at runtime. And for our anchoring, right now it's anchored as a sort of custom stretch. Let's go ahead and anchor that in the corner so that when we move our canvas, it's not going to change or reshape. Oops, come back here. It's not going to deform our canvas or our panel too much. So that's the preview mode. And if you didn't know that, you can when you're clicking on something, you can preview the panel by grabbing the rect transform of its parent, and you can see that there's a little preview, and it'll snap back when you let go. So there we have our basic panel, and that's where we're going to put in our scroll list. So let's go ahead and add an image, a UI image. And this UI image is going to be our header. So let's just call this our, learn how to spell, our header image. And I'm going to align that to the top and then also stretch it. So let's just pop that out. And and let's go ahead and give it some text while we're at it. Make a child of it. UI text. This will be our, and we'll content fit that completely. Pop and center the text, and then just call this our header text. Not going to get too fancy. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. Something like that. So now we have our header. So let's get into the meat of it, and we're going to create a new empty game object. And we'll do that on our panel level. So right-clicking on the panel, I'm going to create a new empty game object. And we don't need any components for this. We're going to be adding all of ours. We simply want that rect transform, which is automatically going to be created whenever we make a game object that is a child of a canvas. And let's align it. So let's go ahead and fix that alignment. Again, I'm going to start off with the anchors are going to fill the parent panel. But then with the rect, what I want to do with the rect is fill up to the header and not beyond. And it'll snap so that it's anchored to its parent, but I have the panel itself only coming up to the header. And then let's, for our components, let's go ahead and add our scroll rect. And this is what's going to be doing the scrolling of content. Oops, I already have something in there. So I can type in scroll to get our scroll rect. And I believe otherwise it's layout. Is it layout? Always get to them. Is it UI? Scroll rect, UI. So we've got our scroll rect. When reading the scroll rect, we have content, and this is the object of the thing that we're scrolling. This is a parent object that scrolls child content. We can choose whether we're scrolling horizontal, vertical, or both, and we can tell what type of movement we want, whether it's elastic, which we're going to keep, which is that sort of most popularized by Apple devices, bounces on the, you can fling it and then it bounces when it hits the edge. And if you're going to do that, how much inertia and what the deceleration rate is. And then optional scroll bars, which we're not going to get into today. And then an on-value changed event if we want to do something when the value changes. Now, to make this, if we were to put in lots of content, it would just scroll off the edge. There's nothing limiting the content inside of this. I mean, I've just realized that I've not brought in my my artwork. So let's go ahead and let me go ahead and bring that in. All right. So these are just two bits of some assets that we've been using, which shows our creatures from Nightmares and some UI panels. But if we have, if we made an image, actually, let me grab that image. Hello. Right click and made a UI image. And then we just made this big. I'm just going to make this extra big. And then we made that image any one of these. Oh, we're going to have to, are these sprites? Did they come in as sprites? Yes, they did. Thank you. See, there's nothing limiting the object that we have inside to this scroll rect that we have. We have a scroll rect there, but it's bigger. So on our scroll rect, and let's change this to scroll view, we also want to add a mask element. And that mask element will mask the content of that panel based on an image component that we include. And you can see as soon as the mask finds that image, it crops the image to inside the mask. And if we wanted to put something silly as our image, you can see that we can create shaped masks as well. But with, that's all in the documentation. You can go ahead and look up also on the Learn site how to use masks and how to use the image for the mask. And I'm going to move this up just because I like it on top. And I actually, whoops, I'm going to move the other one down. Move this one down. And I'm going to move the mask down below the image, just where I'm used to having it. So anyway, so that's our mask. So we now have our mask content. And this image for the scroll view is not what we're making. So what do we want to put into this? And speaking of which, let's not show the graphic. You can choose to show the graphic or not, and we don't want to show the graphic, so we're just revealing the panel underneath. So this is the mask graphic, so we don't want to see that. So we now have our mask. Now we need some content. So let's create a new panel, and this is our content panel. It'll go as a child of the scroll view. So let's create another UI panel, and we can see that we now have a child panel inside that scroll view, and let's just call this our content panel. Content panel. So that's our content panel. And inside that content panel, we can add some content. So let's just go ahead and add a generic button. We can add some buttons, so we can duplicate these buttons, move them around. But this isn't really helping us do layouts nicely. This is actually kind of ugly. We'd have to go ahead and move all of the rects around. Kind of a pain if you ask me. So what I want to do is use some built-in functionality in the panel. So on our parent panel and our content panel, we want to add, and I'm going to clear this out so we can see how to get to it in layout. Sometimes people don't notice this is here because they want to go to UI. And I would say that related to the UI, there's the UI tab, there is the event tab, and there's the layout tab, all of which can give us things that will help us with our UIs. And so on the parent, on the content panel, let's add a vertical layout group. So we've got our vertical layout group, and you can see it's forcing those children to expand their width and their height. And it's aligning to the upper left, so all of these are going to just line up to the upper left. And if we turn this off, you can see that it's moved that rect transform. So those rect transforms have been overwritten, just be aware of that. So the moment what we've done is gone in and this vertical layout group script has written the values into the rect transform of the children to make sure that they fit. So let's make some more. And they aren't scrolling out of our content panel. They're just fitting inside the content panel because it's trying to make the best fit it can. So again, we can start trying to fight the existing component that we put on this vertical layout group. Excuse me. So what we need to do is tell the UI group that our buttons, and I'm going to delete these because it's going to be easier. Well, I can just lay it on all of them. I'm going to change this in a second anyway, but let's go ahead and add in our layout, let's go ahead and add a layout element on these. And we are telling the UI system that each one of these buttons is a layout item. And so we want to give it a minimum height. And let's say our minimum height is going to be 100. And so now each one of these buttons are 100 tall. I don't worry about width. And now they've pushed off, and you can see that content panel, when we include all this stuff, is not changing size. This is going to suck, isn't it? So we're going to get online, we're going to be running, we're going to populate this at runtime, and our content panel is not going to change size. So again, you could get into some sort of script that you write that looks at the amount of content and then tries to adjust the size of the content panel. But we don't need to do that. We have another useful component in our layout, and that is our content size fitter. And we can now put that on the content panel. And we can set that vertical fit to minimum size. So now, if we include that button, UI button, you can see that this is a line because this UI button is going to need, which remember I just deleted all of mine, is going to need that, sorry, whoops, wrong menu. We're going to need that layout element. And that layout element is going to need that minimum height. And I'm leaving this unconstrained, the horizontal height, and to unconstrained. And note that this is in the middle. And if we duplicate our buttons, it's duplicating from the middle. That's because our content panel is stretching with the pivot point at the middle. And this will allow you to do some fun things. If you move the pivot point around, you will be able to move where that content expands from. But what we want to do is take this content panel and we want to have it linked to the top. And then if we have that link to the top, when we duplicate our buttons, they will go down to the bottom. So let's save this. I'm going to save this in my assets folder as _main. Oh yes, I haven't assigned it. Got so far ahead I haven't assigned. So we've got our content panel here. So it needs to be assigned to the content. The scroll rect needs to know what rect transform to scroll. So let me undo that. Just simply delete that. You can see that our content is none, rect transform. So when we go to play, it doesn't know what to scroll. So make sure that in our scroll view that we populate the content panel, which is why all of these buttons are in a panel, not individual children of the scroll view. So we can save this and hit play. And now we should, when we get into, there we go. Get my mouse free here. I haven't gotten rid of horizontal. So let's go back and look at our scroll view. And we do not want horizontal scrolling. So save and play again. There we go. Now we're scrolling in our, got our vertical scroll. Doing this at runtime. We need to find some way now to generate this particular list at runtime. For me, best thing to do is to create a prefab of our button. So let's go ahead and take a button, and let's take a couple of minutes here and make up something that's going to be kind of useful, kind of fun. So let's take our background and put our color somewhere else. Come over here. And look at a dark gray background. Is that too dark? Oh, I think that's too dark. Let's make it about 100. So we've got a gray background. Let's go ahead and make that text look like something. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw that into the chat channel, and let's call this let's come up with some content of what we want to do with this button. If we have some list of things, so we're going to need a name. So let's call this name label. How do you create a scroll bar for this? If we have time at the end, I will go ahead and create scroll bars. But essentially, you create a scroll bar and then you just, without me doing it, you hook it up to the scroll view. So you just create a UI scroll bar and then assign it here in the scroll bars for vertical and horizontal. If we have time, I'll go ahead and show you that. But because they're so simple, I'd rather get through to the procedural generation section. So let's come up with so we have a title. And we're using this as our, we're going to make a prefab out of this. So let's make this a title. Let's make that text. Let's make the text light gray. And I don't know, how big do we want our name label? 24. Maybe bigger, 32. Let's see if we can get away with 32. Maybe too big. But our name label, as well as stretching, let's give us some room over here. Stretch it up in the corner. Because what I'd also like to do is, in our button, add a UI image. So we can talk about how we can add that. And let's get that UI image over to the corner. Oops, no, the UI image we want to be as child of the button, please. There we go. So we've got something like that for our placeholder, and let's just call this our icon image. And then our text is going to be our name label. So we've got our portrait icon, we've got a name label, and let's say we're creating some objects, some items. Let's also create 2 more of these. Let's duplicate that name label, and let's call it a type label, and a rarity. How rare is it of this thing that we have a label? And then I also want another image, so let's duplicate this, and let's call this our champion icon. And so now let's do some quick layout. Let's shove these down. Let's grab rarity as well, and let's move this down to 16. Maybe too small. 24. And let's shove that in. This is just going to be rough because we want these. This is just more for an example. And rarity. There we go, down in this corner. And it'll snap. So we got those 2 lined up. And then, roughly so we have an idea of what's going on here. And then I want to change these to rarity label and our type label. Something like that. What do we have? We got a champion icon. We want that down in this corner. Or we can actually just shove that. Also, don't forget, we can pop that down that way. Come on. Make a little label down there that we'll put something into in a second. So we have kind of a template of a button here. So let's go ahead and save that to our project. I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call this prefabs. And then let's put in our sample button. So we now have a sample button. And so to make our sample button look like something, just so we have an idea of what it's going to look like, let's assign that icon to any piece of art that we have. Pow. That looks okay. And then for that champion label, I just have a little coin image. The idea is just that it has something we can turn on and off down in the corner. Down there. That's going to get in the way of our rarity. Let's just move that up here. Let's put the type on top. So this is just me fussing. And they overlap. So drop this down a little bit and that one up. Somewhere in there. And obviously that one's not big enough. So we have to change these. So not enough room for that. 18. There we go. And let's align these to the side. Anyway, stuff. You can make it look pretty when you're doing this. Move that off the edge. Yeah, it's that idea. You know, you've got a group of monsters or something that you play with, and you need to select one out of a list. So let's go ahead and apply our changes. So that's just given us a sample for us to deal with, and we have a prefab. So how are we going to easily generate these? Well, we're going to need two scripts. Let's start off with one. Let's just start off with our create scroll list. So put our prefab into our prefabs, which I didn't do. And then let's create another folder, and let's call this one our scripts. And then inside scripts, let's go ahead and create a C# script. And let's call this create scroll list. And open that up for editing. So hopefully that'll be big enough for you guys to see. We need to add some namespaces. So let's just go ahead and throw some in. We're going to need to be using our Unity Engine.ui. And we're also going to be needing to be, and you'll see this coming up, using our Unity Engine event systems. We're going to be doing some event systems. We need to pass on what that button can do when you click it. And then because I want a list, I love lists, learn to stop worrying and love the list, using system collections generic. So that's our generic list. So we just throw those in and get them started with some extra namespaces for us. We need to be instantiating a bunch of lists. Now you could probably do this. You'll have to do this in your code at the appropriate time. I'm going to create our scroll list in start, just for simplicity's sake. In whatever it is that you're doing in your game, whenever a method or a button is clicked and it brings up that list, you can populate it at that point, but we'll just go ahead and populate ours at start. So in start, let's call something like, I don't know, populate list. And so kind of backwards, I should probably have written the function first. So let's copy that and then have our void populate list. To populate the list, we'll need something to populate, and we'll need something to base it on, and some place to put it. So we're going to need a reference to our prefab sample button. So let's go ahead and make a public game object reference to our sample button. And then let's also have a public list. Let's just call this our item list. And what's going to go in our item list? Well, let's create a little serialized class so that we can define the things that we are populating. So let's, remember we want to serialize it. So we want a system serializable. Otherwise, we won't be able to see it inside the inspector. And make a public class item. And what are our items? Let's just quickly look back. We made some fields. So we need a sprite icon. We need 2 sprite icons and 3 name labels right now for that. So we're going to need a public string for our name, and we'll need a public sprite because it's we're going to be a sprite for our icon, and we'll need a public string for our type and a public string for our rarity. And there's going to be some more things we'll add to this as we go along, but let's just start off with this. Oh yes, and our isChampion, our bool. Public bool is champion. So there's our public bool is champion. So there's our little class, our item class. So we want our list to be of the type item. So we're going to make this list. We can save it. When we look inside the inspector, we need to put this on something. So let's create an empty, and let's just call this our game controller, whatever we want to do with that. So just it could go on the camera, it can go somewhere in this, but why not put it on the game controller? Let's just lift it up so it's up at the top, because up on top's more important. It makes no difference where it sits in here. And let's go ahead and attach our script. So because we serialized it, we've got our list, of our items. We can put in the name, we can put in our icon. Let's just, as an idea, we'll just populate one here. What shall we call this? Bubbles. Bubbles the clown. Type is a elephant. Rarity is common. And it's not a champion. So, I mean, we'll come up. You'll have to start putting some stuff into the into the chat channel, because I don't know if I can come up with 10 of these. We certainly don't even have 10 pictures. Right now we've got about 4. So we'll be reusing some of these. But how do we transfer this information onto our buttons when we create them? So we have our list, and when we populate the list, we sort of want to say for each item, and I'm going to go ahead and use the var for that, in items, for each item in items, what do we want to do? We want to instantiate that that button. So let's take a reference to it. So our game object reference to what we're creating, and let's call this new button is equal to our instantiate sample button. Instantiate sample button as game object. Notice that I'm using the very simple form of instantiate here. I'm not giving it a position, and I'm not giving it a rotation. They'll just come in at origin, because later we are going to be moving these in the code. So there we go. We've instantiated our button, and now we've got this wonderful class, our item class. How do we put this stuff? How do we put this stuff into here? And speaking of which, I want to adjust one thing, that name label. I want to butt them all up. So let's go ahead and give them all an adjustment there. Make them all left justified. It's bugging me. We can go through and try to get component on, get the game object and start trying to get all of these child components, because remember, we're instantiating the sample button, and then all of these are game object children with components on them. So we'd have to find components in children. But at the same time, we also have multiple versions of the same thing. We've got multiple versions of the label, and we've got 2 images, and we need to differentiate between the 2. What I thought was a very nice, quick solution to this was to create a new mono behavior that we could attach to our game objects. And let's call this one and opening that up for editing, we can get rid of all of our sample code. And we can just create the simple class, a mono behavior, so we can attach it. We want the button. We're going to need some namespaces. Sorry, because we're not going to find button. We're going to need our namespace. We're going to need using Unity engine.ui. So there we've got our button. And so we were going to take a reference to our button, public button, button, and public text, our name label, public image, our icon, public text, our type label, public text. A lot of boilerplate today. How about them Mariners? Public rarity label. And, you know, we could do this for level. We could do this for a bunch of different things that we want to put on, you know, whatever it is on that. And then our public game object. Yep. Champion icon. Champione. Champion icon. So now we have this little sample button class that we can attach to our game object. So let me just save this because it's going to always get frustrated with me. Hopefully we've done nothing wrong. We can attach our sample button script to our sample button. And we can use this as part of our prefab. Let me close down some of these. Oh, and what did I forget to do? I thought that automatically serialized. Do I need to serialize that? Why am I not seeing it? Do I have something in the air? Read the flickin' type value. What have I done? Oh, item list. Typo. For our item and item list. Not paying attention. Pop. Yep. Some warnings. So we've got all of our stuff here. We've got references for all of the content for this particular button. So we can put our champion icon game object in. We can put our rarity label and it'll find the text. We can put our type label. It'll find the text. We can put our icon image and we can put in our name label. And then I'm going to grab the button itself so we can get that button. So now, and remember, yes, it's a prefab. And prefabs can keep track of items instantiated in the scene if they are members of the prefab itself. So when we apply that, we can see when we're looking at our prefab that all of these references are maintained because they're all part of the prefab. So it's not maintaining a reference to some other object, it's maintaining a reference to itself. So this is possible to do. And this will allow us, when we come back to our script, to take our sample button. And first thing we want to do is on our game object new button, say a sample button is going to be, well, what should we call this? Just sample button. It's going to be equal to our new button that we've just created, get component. And what are we going to find? Our sample button script. And so we're going to find our sample button component on that prefab as we're instantiating it. So we already have our links. We don't have to go and find them. And then another huge pile of boilerplate stuff we can do here is just say our sample button dot name label dot text is going to be equal to our item dot name. And then, yes, we'll just buzz through this relatively quickly. It's pretty obvious what we're doing. The icon dot sprite. And remember that we're trying to drill down to the actual items is going to be equal to the item icon. And then our sample button dot type label dot text. Again, we're drilling down to that field that we want in it is our item dot type. Sample button rarity label dot text is going to be equal to our rarity. Oh, our raycast result. Something interesting just to keep it from being so boring. Rarity. Oh, I must have called it something. Item. That's what I want. Item.rarity. Already I've bored myself to death doing this boilerplate stuff. And then lastly, we want to say our champion icon. So our sample button dot champion icon dot set active. And then that's going to be equal to our item dot is champion bool. Okay, so now we've able to set and line up everything that we have inside the data structure that we have inside our game to the fields on the UI elements that we have that are being rendered inside the game as it plays. And the last thing that we want to do is remember that we've made this button, we've set it there to origin with that simple just instantiate sample button. We want to say our new button, our transform on the new button, and we want to set parent, and then we want to we need to set that to something, and I'm realizing we have not taken a reference to that. So also up in here with our item list, we have our sample button. So those are things, sort of abstracty things in our game. With our sample button, we've got our item list. We also need to have the content panel here. We need a reference to that because this is where we're going to be putting the item. So we're going to need a public transform, or what should we call this? Content panel. So then there's our content panel. Content panel. So now we have a place to put it. So we're setting our, so we have this list. We take this list, we iterate through it. We instantiate a button. We take all of our items from our little data collection. We apply that to our UI elements, and then we set the parent for that control panel. Should be it. So let's come back and see what I've done wrong. Sample button. Oh, right. This was being in the scope because I have another sample button already. So let's just call this a button. I had some really terrible names when I was testing. So I was trying to avoid using my terrible names from testing. There we go. Sorry about that. So I've just changed that to sample button called button, because it was walking over the fact that we have a sample button up here. And it was confusing what we were doing. So now we can cut back to Unity, and let's remove that. And when we look at our game controller, we have a few things. Quick, throw some names in. We need to populate this. Bugs. And we can put the Zombunny in there. Type Zombunny. Rarity. Uncommon. Make an enum so it's a pull down. Make it easier. But this is champion. Jackalope. Oh, how about Snuggy? There we go. Snuggy the Zombear. Type is going to be a Zombear. Rarity is rare and not a champion. I'm going to actually, what do we have? 1, 2, 3 of these. Now we've got 10. And they have something. If we want to change them to something other than Snuggy, we'd better come up with some ideas quick, because this is what they're going to be. So let's save this. And what I haven't done is this, assigning our sample button. Oops, nope. Our sample button and our content panel. So now we actually have a sample button to instantiate and a content panel on where to put them. And there we go. We've now created this at runtime, and we can see that Bugs is a champion because we have that in our data. We've turned that on and off. We've replaced the images for everybody, and we can scroll it. We can't, however, do anything. We can't do anything with these buttons. We click on them and nothing happens. So we need to find a way to save in our item class what the button does. How do we do that? Well, if we look at the button class, let's just look at the button class here. If we look at the button class in another window, let's bring this over here, please. There we go. There is in the button onClick. And onClick is a button clicked event. And we get that really nice when we look inside our sample button. We get on the button script, we get this nice little onClick that we can fill out. Well, the designers made it very, very easy for us. In our data structure, we can make a public button clicked event called, I don't know, thing to do. So there's our thing to do. So we can put that there in our item class, and we can save that. And when we come back to Unity and we look at our game controller, once it's compiled, and we look at our item list, we now have a button click event associated with every single one of these. So if we simply make on our create scroll list a public void something to do function, that will do something like print to our log, great debug.log, I done did something. So now we have our I done did something, and we can now assign in our list, create something new to do. Then we can drag our game controller, which holds that script, go to our create scroll list and something to do. And so each one of these buttons can be populated with something different, something the same. It will be passed to our button. And so what we simply need to say is our buttons button, because remember the button is the game object, the button is the script, and we want its on click. So remember that the button reference is on our button class. So we have that button twice. Equals on click, and then we're going to set that to our item. What do we call it? Thing to do. Save that. Come back to Unity, and right now we only have a thing to do on our very first one. So let's hit save, let's hit play. And if you see down here, I done did something. So you can pass that event, that function, just the same way as if you were to save it on the button itself. You can save it in your data structure. You can pass that to the button when you generate it at runtime, and then it will work when you instantiate it. So that's it. We've created our scroll list at runtime. It's scrolling. We've talked about scroll lists. We've talked about how we can have a data list of items and how we can associate that with our items in our scroll list. So do you have any questions? I'm going to throw it open to Q&A. Okay. Pisk6 asks, what if one wants to have the same function on every button but needs a reference to a specific button to access data associated with it, e.g. debug.log is champion? The setup for that is slightly more complicated, and I was going to hold on to doing that type of thing for the modal window episode because I have it prepped and I don't have it at my fingertips. But you can pass parameters through these. I'm trying to figure out how the best way to do that. Let's see if we can do this the simple way. No promises just yet. Okay. And there's our game controller. Actually, that's already hooked up, so we want to go to scroll list, create scroll list, something else to do string. And you could do this with a specific thing where if you wanted to type in the actual string, bubbles, oops, come back here. So we've put in that parameter by hand. I'm avoiding talking about lambdas right now. And we can see that we get the manually input material here. But the thing is that he's talking about adding a dynamic parameter. I need to think about that for 2 seconds. I have this working in the context of the modal window, and we have to get into doing lambdas, and I don't really want to talk about lambdas right now. But you can start to push stuff through these events by putting things through a lambda. Wesley'll asks, if we want to see a plus n text, with n being any number, to pop up the point of contact of a bullet, Can I use the new UI system? And if so, how would I do it? I've tried, but the text pops up outside of my scene. Yes, you should be able to do that, Wesley L. What you should look into is world space canvases, and you will instantiate that world space canvas at that point where the bullet is, and then you can animate it inside your scene. And to look at world space canvases, one of the best places to go is to the blogs. And then let's look at searching the blog down here. I'm going to look for world. Michael Miko is asking, I asked before about drawing on mouse drag as a brush, and you misunderstood me by answering with the cursor class. Ah, you're not talking about changing the cursor to a brush. You're talking about drawing. Well, you'll need to look for when the mouse is down and where it's in contact. You'll also need to look at the position, the pointer position in Vector 2 based on the screen. And then you need to look at the content of the material you'll have underneath you, and you'll need to be looking at, I think it's get pixels and set pixels to be able to draw on a texture. And it's been done. It's probably a Googleable solution, but let's see what we have for learn documentation, scripting, get pixels. How about if I spelled it correctly? Try that. And then set pixel. I'm going ahead and reading. MRT163 says, how do you do an on-off switch or a checkbox? That's built in to the UI. That's the toggle. Let's look at documentation first. UI, let's just UI toggle. Yeah. First of all, let's align you properly. So that's the UI toggle. And if we can get down in the manual, details. This talks about how to use it. And also keep an eye on toggle group. Toggle group essentially makes, I believe they're called radio buttons, where you can click one and it deselects all the rest. PSPK 6, I see that you're asking the question. I'm not sure I understand the rest of it. I had the on-click event in the simple button script and assign it in the prefab. Will it work? I think I know what you're asking is, can you do this and then try to hook something up? The hard part that we have with this is you can only attach this if it's attached to the prefab itself. So if you had a script that was standalone, script example, and it had, something super simple on it, public void do a new thing. Now this should work. Occasionally it makes sense to me and then it doesn't, but stand alone script example. Because one of the problems with what you're asking for is you can't reference anything on a prefab that doesn't exist on the prefab. So now you could refer to yourself and then refer to the do a new thing. And now that's part of the prefab. And if we don't override it with our script, There we go. So yeah, as long as you don't monkey with it somewhere else, you're fine. So not so dim. So if you have it on a script that you have attached to the prefab, you can do that. If it's not attached to the prefab, then you can't. Since this is more about creating the scroll list at runtime, I'll try to get back to you on the best way to pass through more complex information and more complex functions as part of those events, because that starts to become a little bit like the snapping starts to become enough of a class, because I have to explain a whole new concept of scripting to be able to get that to work. Evantro2 asks, if I want to populate the button list from a JSON feed over the internet on a mobile device, iOS, do I need the iOS Pro version, or can it be achieved with the free version? No, I don't think you need Pro version. JSON you're just parsing for JSON. I can't see why that would require Pro, unless there's something in the internet connection that would require Pro. But certainly it's not the JSON part. And I don't maintain this particular thing I'm going to show you at all, but I've used this. I used this the other week, and it was turned out to be very useful to me. And it's not very expensive. This was you can get JSON for .NET, which is what it's based on, for free. I think it's open source, but it's not necessarily maintained for Unity. And this person maintains JSON.NET for Unity, and I was able to parse things in and out of JSON for a small project relatively quickly. The only place that I think that there would be problems is if there's a problem with the way that you're passing the information over the internet. And I'm just going to quickly look and see if something stands out in the licensing comparison. There we go. Now, I don't think there should be a huge access data through World Wide Web functions. Yeah, I mean, this is essentially what I was doing to get and put information. I was passing requests to a website with a database, and then getting it to spit back a bunch of JSON, and that worked fine. And I don't see it limited by Pro. I'm reading VZVMs. Can I use these 2D elements in a 3D project? For example, I have a 3D game, but if I press a special key, I get a GUI like in World of Tanks. Yes, the whole point to the UI is that it sits on top of your 3D game. I mean, I could bring in a 3D game. I mean, let me just bring in a different project. This is the one that we did a little while ago, 2 weeks ago, for our UI tools. Another window. Okay. So this is free aspect. No. What do we change that to? No. 1024, 768. A 3D game. If we go to the scene, and I'm going to go into 3D mode. And so way down here at the bottom is our player. And so perfectly normal 3D game. And then there is a huge UI up here, and that's our UI. So the UI is in a slightly different physical space, but when we look at the final game, we can see that we have a flat UI that is over the top of our 3D game. So yes, the UI sits in a different space and overlays on top of our 3D game. So exactly like watching World of Tanks, you can get your flat screen space UI that will sit on top, and then you've got your 3D game world underneath. Ivantro2 says, is there a way to put 3D elements on top of a 2D UI? Yes, you can, and that's by using your world space canvas rather than your screen space canvas. So if you were to go to the documentation and you were to go to the manual and then look up UI. Actually, let's expand the sidebar. Expand. And look at the overview and look at canvas. This will tell you about the different types of different modes of canvases. There's the screen space overlay, which is what we have now. It's called screen space camera. So if you're using screen space camera, you can have 3D objects in front of your overlay, but it goes on top of, but it's still in screen space. And then finally, you have world space, which the UI are physically in the game with the same size as your players and that sort of thing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you always want to have your UIs. If you want your UIs driven by things in the game, that doesn't mean you always need to have your UI in the game world. I'm trying to think of the best way to show this. I've got a little quick, slightly stale YouTube video of something I did on my own free time. It's not a Unity related thing. Let me, so this is all done with our new UI. This is for Elite Dangerous, another non-Unity game. And it's just something I was doing to make my life easier in the betas. And this is a star map. And it looks like all of these stars are, it's not very HD to me. There we go. All of these labels look like they're in the middle of the 3D volume, but they're actually not. They're on the, they're in screen space. They're on top of everything, the screen space overlay. And in this particular case, the way that you get this is you find the 3D objects in the volume, which are the actual stars. You then map the position onto the screen. You find out where they are on the screen, and then you place the label into screen space. So it appears as if it's in the scene volume, but this also not only allows you to keep it all on one canvas, whereas if you put them into the world space, they'd all have to have individual world space canvases. But it also allows us to control how many of these are on screen. So I fade them out and then I pool them, I remove them. When they leave the screen, I remove them. So they're not all sitting there, whereas if they were in the world space, they would have to all physically be present in some form or another. As a matter of fact, it is the galaxy map of Elite Dangerous. That is exactly what it is. That's what I made it for. And it's for, calculating jump distances and that sort of thing. It's a weekend project on my own, nothing to do with my official work at Unity, but it was a good example in showing off how you can use the UI to solve a quick, simple question. Any last questions? I should wrap it up. GM Liquid Media asks, can you populate the list from game objects that are boxes selected from a mouse drag? Yeah, I'm sure you could, because essentially you're making a list. You'd have to drag the screen. You'd have to find out what that area is, map that onto the game objects. Those game objects that are mapped by being inside the rect go into a list of selected enemies, list of selected tokens. Then you build your list like we saw today for each item in the list. And that list, you're building this list from your selection. So you come on, you select your with a rectangle select, or a shift click select, and that loads things into the item list. And then when you're done or on the fly, it repopulates the list. I need to wrap this up. Thanks for coming. I appreciate that you've come. I appreciate that you're here. and there are more things coming up, and there will be some more of these related to scroll lists and events. We're going to be doing things on Unity Actions and Unity Events coming up. We'll be looking at modal windows so that you can have a single generic yes, no, maybe, cancel button window. So yes, definitely keep an eye on the live training site. So, and follow us at Unity 3D. Follow us at the Ant Ranch. That's me. Follow us at Will Goldstone, who is our fearless leader, fearless and peerless. And then there's at Matt Mirafish, who is Matt Shell. And then you should see for the rest of the week at Mike Geig. So again, yes, thank you for coming. See you next year. And keep an eye on the live training site, and we'll have some more goodies for you. Thanks a lot.